been around here for the last couple of months, you've become very familiar with Luke, the story. Microphone off? We good? Okay. You've become very familiar with Luke and maybe a unique angle that he has taken to the story of the gospel. I was struck this morning. I made it into the prayer room with the leadership team just before I came, and the young man that played the drums was praying, and he prayed that he would never graduate from the gospel. I love that. The gospel is not elementary school, and now we graduate to theology and arguing and all that stuff. No, the gospel is everything. And the thing that strikes me about Luke is that his understanding of the gospel is so big. It's so big. Yes, it's personal. Yes, it involves you and me and the impact of Jesus' death and resurrection on us. But it is so much bigger than that. And Luke hits us right in the mouth with it in the opening chapters when he describes a gospel that comes into the world that is owned by Caesar. And he says in his opening chapters, Jesus is the true and righteous king. Caesar's a fraud. People, that's big. Now, if you haven't been around for our journey through the book of Luke, and maybe you're a first-timer here, the same thing is true about the crucifixion. I remember when I was a kid, we sang a hymn out of the hymn book. I love to tell the story of unseen things above. And it had a line in it, the old story. It was. It's an old story. It's been 2,000 years, right? But what happens with old stories is that we remember what we remember, but we miss what is being said. So this morning I'm going to read just a couple of verses out of the old story, but here's what I would like to challenge everybody here. I want you to ask yourself the question, as you hear this, as we engage it together, I want you to ask the question, what am I seeing? Where's the good news here? Is it just good news for me? Or is it bigger than that? Talk about that with your kids. Think about that as a family. Wrestle with that this week as we are leaning into a world that celebrates Good Friday and Easter, but doesn't always understand what in the world they're celebrating. They turn it into bunnies and Easter eggs. But they miss the point of the story. Read with me from Luke chapter 23. If you are able, please stand for the reading of the word. Luke chapter 23, we're going to read just the verses starting at verse 44. It was now about the 6th hour. That's the way we tell times, 12 noon. And there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. That's 3 p.m. And that's significant. I'll explain it in a minute. While the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now, when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. Literally, just. Literally, the true and righteous king. And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. Don't you wonder what they thought? Have a seat. Sometimes people think about a sermon as the preacher has a message for you, and I'm going to deliver the message, and you're going to take it and run. This morning is just going to be a tour guide of 5 verses. Because I think we often, as I said, celebrate the old story and miss the new point. So let's walk our way through it. I'm titling it The Jury Votes, because we have been for the last several weeks studying the last week of Jesus' life. And as I said to you once before, the last week of Jesus' life was filled with trials. He was put on trial by the Pharisees. He was put on trial by the chief priests and the teachers of the law. He was put on trial by the committee that runs the temple and all of its systems, the Sanhedrin. He was put on trial before Pilate, then Herod, then back to Pilate. All of them put him on trial. And I suggested to you back then, that's not accidental, because the last week of his life was the week during which they were running up to Passover, the same week that on the other side of the wall of Jerusalem from where this takes place, there had been a lamb, the lamb for the people, who had been staked out in the temple courtyard with food and water, so that all of the people of Israel could examine the lamb to make sure that Exodus 12 was being fulfilled. Yes, the lamb was without blemish. That's the week they were testing Jesus to see if he was a fraud. You don't want to miss that. That's the backstory to everything that happens here, okay? All right, so the first thing that we're going to run into is a jury verdict that is a strange one. Here it is. It was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. Why does he mention the time? Why does Mark mention the time? Why does John mention the time? Well, because on the other side of the wall, 12 o'clock was when the liturgy began for the slaying of the Passover lamb for the people. And that ceremony, the collecting of the blood, the sprinkling of the blood, the dissection of the animal, that was a 3-hour liturgy. And it ended at 3 o'clock in the afternoon as the high priest would stand before the people. And according to the best records we've got of first century Judaism, he finished the liturgy, the formal readings and writings and readings of the Passover liturgy. He finished it with this phrase: "It is finished." John tells us it was at 3 o'clock when Jesus cried out, "It is finished." Not my suffering is finished. No. He used a phrase that was explicit. I have accomplished my work. I've done it. Now, Father, I'm in your hands. Do what you will. Wow. So what happens while this is going on from 12 to 3? What happens? Well, the sun went out. The sun failed. Did you read that language? While the sun's light failed. Verse 45. Now, if I'm watching this from a distance, like the women and the others who had tracked 75 miles from Galilee to get to Jerusalem to watch the one they had followed for 3 years die unjustly at the cruelty of the Romans' hands. If I'm standing there, I'm going to look at the sky and I'm going to say, what is going on here? This wasn't a cloud passed over. And if they were good Jews, and if they knew the Old Testament, they might remember this passage. This is from the prophet Joel. And it will come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. And I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. And the sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. That's the very passage that Peter in 50 days is going to quote at Pentecost. Because for those people in Jesus' shadow, the cross and the resurrection and Passover were all part of one event. The coming of Messiah, the accomplishment of what the Messiah had been sent to do. And they're telling us, using Joel language, oh, this is the moment that judgment begins. This is the start of Judgment Day. This is the start of the day when the word of the King forces itself into the hearts of mankind everywhere, and everybody is faced with a judgment choice. Do I follow him, or do I stand with those who crucify him? And the sun winks out to announce, this is what's going on. Wow. But that's not the only vote. The cosmic vote is there. The cosmos acknowledges what's going on. But there's more. The second vote is the vote of the temple itself. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Now, you know, I'm getting to be a little bit older. You might not have noticed that, but there are still things you learn even as you get older. For many years, and in fact I've written on the subject, for many years I've always thought that the tearing of the temple curtain in two from top to bottom was God's way of saying, now there's a way open for my people to come into the Holy of Holies. And I still think that's true. But here it's set in the context of judgment. The sun winks out because the judgment has begun. The gospel judgment has begun. Gospel always has two sides. Judgment for those who reject. Amazing grace for those who receive, right? It's justice and redemption side by side. Well, here it is, the same thing. The curtain of the temple opens up, and now those who have been kept outside can freely come into the presence of God. What a wonderful thing that is. But at the very same time, God is announcing something here. For the Jews in the first century who tried to maintain a temple that was a shadow of its former glory, you know, they didn't have the original Ark of the Covenant anymore. They didn't have any of the temple furniture. Nebuchadnezzar had taken that off to Babylon, melted it down, and made it into whatever, coins or something. That was gone. They've got an empty shell, and they're worshiping in a memory hall. But they still maintain the idea. You know what the idea was? God is holy. You're not. There's no way in. Bear your guilt. We will help you forget. That was the system. God is holy. You're sinners. There's a gap between sinners and the holy. You can't get through the gap unless we help you. We're the temple servants. We're the gatekeepers. Now, then it was a Jewish system, but throughout all the ages, there have been similar systems that keep you remembering your guilt and never getting freed from it. You think about the Middle Ages and the Church of Rome and the grip they had on people and the way they made them pay and pay and pay. You know how the basilica in Rome was built? On the backs of the money that was collected by Johann Tetzel, the cardinal, that raised money by the sale of indulgences. That's how that thing was built. You pay, but you never get free. That system, the system, whether it's Jewish or Catholic or any system that keeps God's people bearing their own guilt and never finding freedom, the system just got fired when he tore the temple veil. He's announcing not only that my people can come home to God, he's announcing that any system that keeps them out is done. I want you to hear that, because I don't know everybody in the room this morning. I don't know whether you came in here loaded with guilt. I don't know whether you came in here bitter about it, angry, because religion and religiosity and religious leaders have kept you feeling burdened and never free. I want you to hear me this morning, and I want you to hear this. The veil is done. The barrier is gone. All who want to come to God are open and free to do so. Believe that. Believe that. Don't leave here thinking that you've got more to do, more to pay, more sit-ups, more push-ups, more biblical obligations. No more. Third vote is a different one. He breathed his last, and when the centurion, now understand what we're talking about here. A Roman centurion, a commander of a battalion of 100 men. When the Roman centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God. And then he said, certainly this man was innocent. Now, I dug into that word this last month. Innocent. What? Morally? Yeah, morally. Had he sinned? No, I don't think he jumped into the Jewish construct of what constitutes a sin and what doesn't constitute a sin. Did he violate the Sabbath? Did he violate the temple? Did he violate? Well, he didn't jump into that argument. He jumped into the argument that Rome would have had. Who is Caesar? Who is king? Who determines what is justice? Who determines who in this place is justified and who is on the wrong side of history? In the Roman Empire, for a centurion, that was easy to answer. Caesar's the boss. He decides what's right and wrong. Right? I mean, that's kind of the world we're living in more and more. Whoever happens to be the leader decides, oh, this is what, I say what's right, I say what's wrong. But that's not the word he uses. He uses the word that says this man was in the right. He is the righteous man. And he uses language that is just profound. It's almost as if he's scoping out the whole of Israel's history. He started out with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and 12 sons. And the 12 sons became 12 tribes. And the 12 tribes flaked off 10 because they were rebellious, and he focused on the 2. And the 2 became rebellious, and he focused on the returning exiles from Babylon, which is only a remnant. And the remnant wasn't worth much, and they started fighting among each other for 400 years. And by the time Jesus comes, he's the last remnant. He's Israel. And now Israel dies. Where's the righteous one left? The righteous man, the one righteous man left is dead. Now what? It's both a cry and a jury verdict. This man was in the right. And I'm not. I just nailed his hands and feet to the cross. And there's one more. And all the crowds that had assembled for the spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home, beating their breasts. Uses a phrase in the Greek that implies that the heart, the breast, as the place where your emotions and your deepest values are held. And they're beating their breasts because they now realize, we just cried for him to be crucified. Look what we have done. Oh, God. And you know the amazing thing about the verdict? It doesn't make them unresponsive to the good news. It's almost the next chapter, because Luke continues with Luke 2.0 called Acts. And it's almost the next chapter when 3,000 of them did the same thing. They heard Peter's sermon. They realized the sun dark, the moon dark, the judgment has come. Oh, God, what have we done? And Peter says, repent, change your mindset, follow him, and you will be saved. And 3,000 of them did, because they were not kept out. They were welcomed in to the people of God. Again, I say to you, I don't know where you've been. I don't know how you think of the people of God. You know, churches are not just organizations. That's the mistake we think when we think about church, and we get frustrated with organizations and organizational slow. They often say about Presbyterians, where I've served for the last number of years, they say Presbyterianism grinds slowly, but it grinds fine. Yuck. Who wants to be in that, right? I mean, the organizations kind of wear us out. We don't like them. We can't figure out how to escape them. But church is not, first of all, an organization. It's first of all a family, a people who live life together, who love one another, who serve one another, who pray for one another, who bleed for one another, who do whatever we can do to be the one unity that is the family of God, so that the world can see what God has shaped. How beautiful is that, right? I don't know what you think about church. I don't know whether you think church is your family, or whether you think it's an event on Sunday morning, never to be repeated, or whether you think it's just an organization. We have to figure out what the organization is going to do in the current moment. And I'll wait until the elders tell me. That would be sad. And I don't know, maybe you've been outside of church and have never really been drawn in. This is just a big family. We're a mess. And we're a forgiven mess, and a forgiving mess, and a loving mess. But sometimes our love isn't so very good. That's who we are. But the family of God is big. It's big. And these people who cried for him to be crucified now are beating their breasts, going home, asking God, what have we done? And in just a few short weeks, they're going to be given an opportunity to turn. And they do, many of them. Maybe you're one of them. And there's one more. And all his acquaintances. That's an interesting word. We use acquaintances as one step lower than friends, don't we? I have friends and then I have acquaintances. Right? That's not what he uses it here for. The word here is the people who know him. All the people who knew him. And that implies they didn't know about him. They didn't know his name. They knew him. They knew his heart. They might not have understood everything that he was doing to announce the gospel of the kingdom into the world of Caesar, but they knew him. That's why the sinners, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, the pickpockets, they wanted to be with him. They knew him. They knew that he saw beyond their sin, and he saw their hearts, and he loved them. And they were willing to turn from that to him. They knew him. I don't know how big this crowd was, but the people were those who knew him and a bunch of women. I'm always struck by how Luke and the other gospel writers too really focus on the power of the witness of the women. I worked with a mission organization one time where the leader of the organization, working among the Muslim tribes of the Hui people in northwest China, he said to us, my strategy is simple. I work on the grandmothers. If I can get a grandmother, I've got a church. Because the grandmother runs the heart of the family. And it's true. It's true here too, even though we don't live that kind of a family structure. Grandmothers are the heart. Mothers are the heart. The women here are so critical to the witness of the gospel in the world. And they're standing, they're standing at a distance watching. Don't you just wonder what was running through their minds? Oh, wow, the sun's out. The centurion who crucified him just pronounced him innocent. Jesus said, I've accomplished it. Now I'm in your hands, God. And then he died. What is this? And that's, I think, where we are. We're at a distance. It's a distance of time, not just space. We're a couple of millennia later, and we're reading the old story that we might not even understand the dimensions of, right? And this morning, this goofy preacher reminds us of some strange dimensions that I never thought about before. Okay, good. Think about them. But now do this. What do I do with that? Do I just watch it and meditate on it and ask the question, what's in it for me? Really? I don't think so. You? I don't think that's the appropriate response when you just have figured out that this man we killed is greater than me, greater than the temple, greater than the cosmos itself, which winked out in awe before his death. This is the one who created all things and who died for all things. And I'm not making that up. John said it in the most familiar verse in all of Scripture. God so loved the cosmos. Not the world of people. That's ekumena. He so loved the cosmos, the world he created. He wants it back, and he loved it, and he sent his son with an assignment. You take it back. And that's going to mean you're going to have to liberate it from darkness. You're going to have to liberate it from sin. You're going to have to liberate it from evil. You're going to have to liberate it from the powers that have controlled it. And it's going to cost you your life. Yeah, this is bigger than you and me. This is big. What am I going to do with that now? Well, they stood at a distance watching these things. And then in the next chapter and a half, and then to Luke 2.0 in the book of Acts, we're going to find out what they're going to do with these things. They're going to be filled with the Spirit of God. They're going to get real bold about what they have learned about the man they thought they knew. And they're going to go tell everybody they see. And now the question, after we read this story, is what about us? What did we see? And what are we going to do about it? Tell everybody we see. Well, that could get you in trouble. Yep, could get you killed. There are places in the world where you get killed for telling people about Jesus being the redemption of the world, greater than any of your presidents or kings or parliaments or anything else. This is Jesus. He is the true and righteous one. He is the King, the Messiah who rules over all things. Yep, he is. And he's not just a good prophet, because a good prophet dies and he becomes a martyr and then he gets forgotten. And he's not just a wonderful man who's willing to love sacrificially, and he's a good example, and now we forget him. He is the one who came back to life and stands before all men as the living Lord of history. And you got to do something with that now. This is a big week. This is a judgment week. This is a week when you are faced with a gospel that doesn't just inform you, it claims you. What will you do with Jesus? We're at a distance. We're watching. What are we seeing? We'll be back again on Friday after we've had a week to think about this. And then on Easter Sunday, when we get launched into the world, when we get commissioned, what are you going to do with it? Let's pray. God, with the crowds, I beat my breast and say, I'm unworthy of such love. With the sun, I close my eyes and realize how wicked is this world, how evil is this darkness, how broken are we. With the temple, I rejoice that there's an access to you, but I lament all the religiosity, all the legalism I've participated in that keeps people in the guilt and never sets them free. And with the crowds, I look from a distance and I wonder, what will I do with this Jesus? Speak to every one of us this week. Grip us. Squeeze our hearts, please. And we know you will, because we ask it in the name of the crucified one who watched us watching him.